Brice Griffin. I'm here from Charlotte, North Carolina. In December of 1998, I lived here and I was dating a DC rock icon when I found myself pregnant. When I called to share the news, he simply said, "Let's take care of it." I was so relieved. I felt so lucky to have such a caring boyfriend who wouldn't make me face this choice on my own. He reassured me, "Don't worry, I've done this before." I was so lucky. When we arrived at the clinic, I checked in and Brian paid for the procedure with his band's Amex. That actually made me laugh. It was a little over $700 because I was lucky enough to be able to afford to be anesthetized for the procedure. I was really lucky. I remember very little about the procedure. I remember the abortionist introduced himself, though I didn't feel like I was making the best first impression, there on the table in nothing but a surgical gown. And the nurse inserted my IV. He told me he had a daughter, and actually started talking to me about mutual interests that she and I had. In retrospect, I'm so disgusted. This father was making a living, sucking the life out of women, and had the nerve to mention his own daughter to me. As he performed an ultrasound, he looked over my shoulder because the screen was behind me and said, "Perfect. You're just about 8 or 9 weeks." Obviously, I knew nothing about fetal development, but I really did feel lucky that I was just about 8 or 9 weeks. And shortly thereafter, I fell asleep. When I awoke, I was being wheeled into the recovery room. I was helped into a recliner. Then I sat in a room full of recliners with girls who obviously couldn't afford the anesthesia, who were all sobbing. I really felt lucky sitting in that room, thinking I must be the only one with such a wonderful boyfriend who would help me through this. After the anesthesia had worn off, Brian picked me up. He had been at Home Depot to pass the time. He was considering home improvements, while a child of mine, maybe not his, was being killed. It really was no big deal. I was so lucky. For months after that, I knew nothing except that I wanted to die. Death was the only certain escape from the horrific pit that had formed in my soul. I begged for therapy. I screamed for help, but only inside. How could I admit what I had done? So I buried it. No one else needed to know. No one else needed to judge me as harshly as I had come to judge myself. I trudged through several more years, feeling happy at times and doomed at others. One day I was running and listening to a homily by Father Larry Richards about confession. He said loosely, "If you've had an abortion, confess it. Your child is praying for you in heaven." My chest heaved with uncontrollable sobs, and I ran home to arrange an appointment for confession with my dear priest. There in the confessional, heaving again with sobs, I truly expected to be struck by lightning. I now sat there acknowledging that I was guilty of the worst sin possible, murder. My dear priest smiled and handed me a box of tissues and said, "God is so happy you are here. You will be forgiven, but you need healing." He then proceeded to tell me about Rachel's Vineyard, a ministry, as you all know, aimed at healing men and women who've experienced abortion. My recovery retreat was a life-changing experience, and I thank God for it. I thank God for Father Rue, for Father Frank, and Rachel's Vineyards, for my loving husband Mike and our amazing 4 children, and for all of you. I thank God for the entire pro-life movement, as I wouldn't wish my experience on my worst enemy, and that's why I'm silent no more.